Well, hello and welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. Happy New Year! I'm very excited to announce that this is season 2 of the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast, a podcast that you guys have rewarded by bringing it at the very top 10% worldwide just by episode 10. So I'm very honored and I feel very blessed to be here with you and to be sharing these news and to be starting this new season. As you can tell, if you're watching this on YouTube, this new season brings the video version as well on top of the podcast. So if you're listening to this in audio format, just know that if you tend to prefer YouTube or sometimes you want to be watching the video and having the captions playing below, well, all of that is now available, at least when I am having my solo episodes, because starting this season, I'm going to try to be bringing at least one expert guest a month in order to discuss all these issues that we love talking about in more depth and to have people share what they know and what they've seen from their own practice. So I don't want to extend this any longer. I would love to get into the first episode of this season of this year of 2025, which has the power to change how we parent. And not only that, but it has the power to transform the way that we view ourselves. In today's episode, we're basically discussing how we can gentle parent ourselves. Because sometimes it may feel like you're trying to gentle parent your children and it's just not coming out right. And even though you're very well prepared, you have read all the books and you know all the theories, you're in gentle parenting groups in Facebook and you've got so many suggestions of ways that you could tackle issues, you just can't seem to get it right sometimes or many times. And to a degree, it has happened to all of us. And there is an explanation for why it happens. If you want the simple answer and you don't want to watch the whole episode, here is the simple answer. Hi there. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Here is the simple answer. We haven't been gentle parented ourselves. So we have internalized the messages that we received from our parents, the parenting we've received from our parents, and that is how our adult self parents our inner child. And so when we try to parent our children in a different manner, there is something inside us that just doesn't feel right. Our inner child wonders, why are you treating these kids this way? When you have never, ever extended that kind of compassion and gentleness toward me. And so the inner child rebels, but also the adult parent, the one that carries all the messages we have received from our parents, it feels betrayed. It knows how to do things a very specific way. And it also feels like it's betraying your parents. There's a part of you that potentially feels like by choosing to be a different parent to your children, you are being ungrateful to your parents for what it is that they've done. And as irrational as it may sound, I find that a lot of people that I work with need to deal with the subconscious guilt of letting go of their parents' transcript, the narrative that they've inherited, because deep down inside, very, very subconsciously, they feel like if they let go of that, they are undoing all the good things that they received. And so what we work on is disassociating the good things that we received, the things that we appreciate, the effort that we know they've done, the love that we know they had for us, and all the things that may have not been the best way to deal with a situation, but were definitely well-intentioned, and those things that we want to let go of so that it doesn't feel like betrayal and it doesn't feel like we are being ungrateful. That is the gist of it. But allow me to rewind and go from the beginning, because as you know, I like to go into depth. And so here it goes. One more thing before we jump in. I want to invite you to join my free weekly newsletter. Parenting and relationships can be so overwhelming, but every week I share simple, actionable steps to help you navigate this uncharted territory and build stronger connections with your family. It's quick, practical, and totally free. Sign up at markellakaplani.com/newsletter. That is markellakaplani.com/newsletter. Let's make this year a little easier together. Parenting is one of life's greatest invitations. It challenges us, yes, but it also is an invitation for us to rewrite the way that we approach our own development. For many of us, the default way that we have learned to improve ourselves, to grow, is rooted in self-criticism. Why can't I get it right? I'm not good enough, not yet at least. We push, we pressure, we try to will ourselves into being better. But what if there's a different way? What if instead of forcing ourselves, we gently invited ourselves into growth, just like we do with our kids? Dr. Christine Neff, a leading researcher in self-compassion, says that when we treat ourselves with compassion, we create the emotional safety needed for us to take risks and grow. That's exactly what gentle parenting is about. Creating a foundation of kindness and understanding that allows us to thrive. If you've ever found yourself snapping at your kid and then spiraling into guilt, or feeling like you need to fix yourself and not knowing where to begin, this episode is definitely for you. Today, we'll explore 1, why so many of us default to self-criticism, 2, how this impacts our parenting, and 3, and most importantly, how to shift toward self-compassion. Because our parenting doesn't just shape our kids, it transforms us too. So whether you're listening to this while you're washing your dishes, commuting, or just catching a quiet moment alone, I'm really glad you're here. Let's figure this all out together. So let's start by diving into self-criticism. What does it look like? Where does it come from? And why does it feel so ingrained within so many of us? Self-criticism often sneaks into our daily lives in subtle but powerful ways. Maybe it's that inner voice that says, why can't you pull yourself together whenever you're late? Or that guilt that you feel after a moment of frustration with your child. It's that relentless feeling that whatever you do, it's never enough. For some of us, definitely for me, it shows up as perfectionism, trying to meet impossibly high standards. For others, but also for me, it could show up as procrastination, avoiding tasks in fear of messing up. And that, especially in combination with perfectionism, can end up in just paralysis. But either way, the root is the same. We're hard on ourselves because we've been taught that this is what it takes for us to improve. So in working on myself and in working with clients who are facing similar issues, the number one objection that comes forward when we try to tackle perfectionism or procrastination in fear of messing up is that, well, if I am not hard on myself, if I am compassionate and kind to myself when I mess up, then how am I ever going to improve? Are we not supposed to develop? Isn't the point of all of this to grow and to progress? And the answer is yes, of course it is. But what we don't understand and what we need to unlearn is that growth cannot possibly happen from a place of self-punishment and self-criticism and self-loathing. And I know that's very hard to do because that's exactly how we were parented, how most of us were parented. We got yelled at or punished or the silent treatment whenever we did something that didn't go along the lines of what our parents wanted. Or even when we did something that was dangerous and we had to be stopped, we had to be taught not to do that. But the way that it was done, the tone in which the message was conveyed, the words that were said were very critical and very blaming. And so that's how we learned that people just become better, that people learn. Even if you look at the educational system, up until recently, the way that things were done were very much punitive. The red marker that denotes mistakes, the sticker that you don't get, the yelling by the teacher, the humiliation of being called out and not knowing the answer. That is how we've been taught that learning happens. So do you see what I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to help you be compassionate with yourself when you can't be compassionate with yourself, because that's also bound to happen. You are bound to feel awful in your first attempts to try to feel compassion for yourself when you realize just how critical you are and have been with yourself so far, and just how hard it is for you to turn to kindness. And so it's very important to keep in mind each time you quote unquote fail to be kind to yourself and to be compassionate and to extend that gentleness that you want to then extend to your children, that you've got a lot of unlearning to do because you have been programmed in a particular manner and it's not your fault. So this is a gist of where this all comes from. Self-criticism wasn't born out of thin air. It is shaped by the environments that we grew up in, by the societal messages that we've absorbed, and the experiences that we've carried into adulthood. So having said all this, I would like to invite you to kind of think about the way that discipline was handled in your own family environment. Were mistakes met with understanding, or were they met with punishment or shame? For most of us, the truth is that we grew up in environments where criticism was the norm. And our parents weren't trying to be mean. They thought that they were doing the best for us because that's how they were parented. And that's where we learned that being corrected was connected to our worth. It measured our worth. But even though most of our parents, I'm willing to bet, had the best of intentions, this kind of upbringing often leaves a lasting mark on us. And of course, if this happens in the family system, you can also understand that this is impacted by society as well. So from school, like I said before, but also in the media and at work, we receive these messages that tell us that success requires discipline and toughness, whether that is at work or that is in fitness or that is in parenting. And there's nothing wrong with discipline, but there's a difference between disciplining and self-criticism. And the fact that for many years, these two have been associated with one another, that is where discipline goes wrong. And how does this show up in parenting? Well, for moms, it shows up a lot in terms of perfectionism, following the societal expectations, being that great, perfect, self-sacrificing caregiver. For dads, on the other hand, it might look like the need to be the steady rock for the family, to not have feelings, to have it all together all the time. So these messages that we've received all throughout our life reinforce the narrative that in order to succeed, in order to do well, in order to be good parents or good employees or good in whatever it is that we want to do, being hard on ourselves is not only normal, but it is necessary. It is needed. We're doing good by being tough and hard and unforgiving. And of course, in all of this, there's also the personal experiences. So our family environment and society have worked together in order to give us a particular narrative, to create that core belief that in order to succeed, we need to be hard on ourselves. We need to be critical, judgmental even. And then, based on this philosophy, we start to see things from the particular prism, and combined with our personal experiences, now, boom, right? So experiences of failure or rejection or criticism in early childhood or even early adulthood will shape the way that we view ourselves, and they will amplify the voice of our inner critic. For many people, there's a phrase that echoes in their mind again and again, which is something along the lines of, well, if you want to succeed, you have to push yourself harder. So then why does criticism feel so familiar, and why does it feel like it's a good thing? Well, at its core, self-criticism is a survival strategy. If we catch our mistakes first, maybe then we can avoid the judgment of others. And if we take it back to prehistoric times and knowing that we are a species that relies on community in order to survive, we know for a fact, we've discussed this before, that we really needed to be liked. It's ingrained in us. It is how our brain is wired, that we want to be accepted by our group. What does that mean? Well, we're going to fear criticism because criticism by others may mean that we're rejected from the tribe, and that may mean that the lion that's outside of the cave that you're no longer invited in, well, it's going to eat you. So if we push ourselves hard enough, then maybe we can prove that we are worthy of acceptance, worthy of being part of the group. It's not a very pleasant way to live, that's for sure. But it is a coping mechanism that many of us have adopted in order to navigate in this very unforgiving world. So it is partly because of our brain wiring, but it's also partly because of our experiences. Many people have grown up in environments where they felt that their place in the family dynamic was threatened whenever they didn't follow whatever it is that this particular parent wanted. And so since children basically understand the world in they love me or they don't love me, and it's just black and white, there's no gray zone. There's no, oh, well, it's well-intentioned. They're doing the best they can, despite the fact that it makes me feel uncomfortable or it makes me feel unloved. I know my mom loves me, even though she's giving me the silent treatment. No, kids cannot do that. They can't process this. So the silent treatment or the yelling or the punishment is a form of love being retracted. So it's an immediate threat. And how do we cope? Well, we learn. We learn that acting in a particular way is not favorable. It will cause us to feel threatened. And so what do we do next time? We are vigilant and we catch ourselves before we do the thing. This is where we turn the criticism we received into self-criticism. Do you now see how this is a survival mechanism? How it's a coping mechanism that when used extensively can start to cause issues. So as children, we are dependent on our parents, and feeling that kind of threat means we have to do something about it. But as we try to grow and develop, if we don't deal with this kind of thought process, if we allow it to grow and go rampant, what it does is that it presents an obstacle to our development. We keep on using that same mechanism, thinking that we will learn, but what we're doing is we're putting ourselves in constant fight or flight mode. As Brené Brown puts it, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we're capable of change. So yes, self-criticism might and does feel like it's helping us improve. But often what it does is that it keeps us in vicious cycles of shame and self-doubt. And here is where this all ties into how we parent. The way that we treat ourselves becomes the foundation of how we parent our children. If our default response to a mistake is to be harsh, then it becomes very hard when we are underslept, overstimulated, exhausted, to be able to respond in a gentle manner. You will always go into default mode when you are under stress. And let's face it, parenting involves a lot of stress. It's a lovely experience, but we do become masters of handling constant stimuli coming at us, trying to make sure our children survive and trying to handle tantrums and making sure that everything is ready and planning ahead and all that mental load. It's a constant state of stress. And so more often than not, we're going to revert to default mode. And that is why it becomes really important that we resolve our own grievances with our adult parent, that we reparent ourselves. We reparent our inner child in that gentle way that we want to parent our children, so that this becomes our default. And even under a lot of stress, this is where we naturally revert to. So then how do we break away from self-criticism and create a gentler way of parenting ourselves? This is that kind of thing that I've said that all of us, it's part of our progress, it's part of life that we will have opportunities for growth. But parenting specifically is a big invitation for that. It's definitely one of the biggest transformations that can happen if we allow it to, if we decide to accept the invitation, to rethink the way that we treat ourselves, to start to wonder whether force is really the answer. Parenthood, in my opinion, is one of the greatest teachers that we get to have. It holds up a mirror to parts of ourselves that we may not have noticed before, we may not have had access to before. Our habits, our reactions, and yes, even our inner critic. We may not have noticed how they were acting because, again, this was our default. But as we intend to act differently with our children, we start to notice when we falter. We start to notice that this is not easy on us. We start to then notice these reactions that before weren't necessarily such a big problem for us. It was other people. They didn't get us, or they were too touchy. But with our children, we can't use these excuses as easily. We have to reflect back onto us and how we may be somehow contributing to a situation. And so this is where this profound opportunity to grow happens, because we are willing to look in the mirror for the greater good of our children. It is as if we are forced to confront ourselves. At least those of us who really have the intention to act differently, to be a better version of ourselves for our children. To this day, and that is even before I became a parent or even thought of becoming a parent, I haven't met a parent who wasn't willing to confront themselves for their children. And this shows up in simple daily moments. Like, for example, have you ever felt very, very frustrated with the mess that your child created? Only to then discover when you reflect back that it wasn't really the mess that you were angry about. It was that feeling of being overwhelmed, of being stretched too thin, where the mess just then became that cherry on top of the cake that you felt you couldn't handle, that you felt was an insult to all the things you had to deal with, in a sense. Or maybe you found yourself being very hard on your child for a mistake and then felt guilty about it, but then thought, oh, well, I never let myself get away with this kind of thing either. So it's only natural that I don't let her or him get away with it either. This is the mirror of parenthood. It reflects back to us those patterns and beliefs that we've created for years. Beliefs that we may not even realize we had. You might start to notice that you always put yourself last, for example, even when your mind and your body are screaming for rest. Parenthood challenges us to ask, why do I believe that my needs don't matter as much as others do? In that yearning and fighting for perfection, you might start to notice that you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable because you're supposed to be the one who fixes things and finds solutions and solves all the problems, because maybe society told you that this is your role. Or maybe you've had to be that person. You took on that role in your own family dynamic when you were a child. You were the one that was valuable because of the solutions that you offered. And that became the role that you played. And if you start to notice, maybe it's the role you've been playing in every setting. Maybe you're the solution person at work as well, for example. That was so natural that you didn't notice. But then parenthood comes along and you're supposed to be vulnerable if you're going to be gentle, right? Then you notice, I just can't be vulnerable. That's the mirror. You get to look and see, well, hey, oh my gosh, I've been playing this role of Superman or Superwoman. And it's always been that way. It's spilled into every single thing that I do. I am the fixer for my friends and for my coworkers and for my parents and for my siblings. If that is who I am, then I'm also carrying a lot of pressure. And I also have to be the one that remains steadfast and tough. And that doesn't go along with being gentle. And this is why self-compassion matters. When we treat ourselves with kindness and understanding, we create the emotional foundations that we need to grow. Quoting Christine Neff, who, like I said, is an expert in self-compassion. You can look her up. You'll love her work. She says, self-compassion provides the safety needed to step outside our comfort zone and try something new. Think about it this way. If your child makes a mistake, you know that shaming them will not actually create a better result. It won't teach them anything. The same is true for you. Growth doesn't come from harshness. It comes from grace, giving yourself grace. And I mean, it really makes sense, doesn't it? Why should it be any different? You are trying to adopt gentle parenting for your children because deep inside you, you know that this is the best way for them to grow. You know that punitive methods are only going to mess with their brain. You have seen the research that shows that yelling will then produce children who are more anxious. And you know that anxiety inhibits the learning process. So why should it be any different for you? This is the same process, but you continue to treat yourself the same way, to call yourself names internally when you don't do something, to shame yourself and guilt trip yourself when you don't do something perfectly. And you expect that you will learn from this and that next time you'll do better, you'll show up differently. If you want to test gentle parenting and to really see its effects, you have to try it on yourself first. Put on your mask first before anyone else's, right? So then gentle parenting yourself is not just about your own growth. It becomes the legacy that you leave for your children. You not only parent them better and help them grow, but you're also, in the long term, helping them not have to go through this process of disassociating things, of working on core beliefs that are damaging their self-esteem. You are creating a better now and a better future for them in so many ways. And if this wasn't enough to convince you, I want you to think of it this way. Our children will not learn from our words. Not much anyway. Most of what they will learn is from the way that we treat ourselves. And so for me, I have worked a lot on not showing frustration with myself when I don't get something right in front of my son. And behind the curtain, even when my son isn't there, I am also working on that with my therapist in terms of dealing with my own inner critic, in terms of working through lowering that coping mechanism, of lowering my defenses so that I am not defaulting to that way of treating myself, and so that then I won't default into treating him in that harsh manner. But even before it gets to him, imagine this. You're in the kitchen, you're holding the plates, they fall, they break. Your children are there, they see the incident, and then the first thing you do is you say, how stupid am I? Or you bang your forehead, or you get really frustrated and angry and you clean the floor angrily, or you freak out because of the disaster that was caused. Or even you freak out because you're afraid that they will step on the glass. This is exactly what they are seeing you do with yourself when you made a mistake. And so maybe you have never yelled at them for a mistake. Maybe you've never snapped at them or been harsh with them. But if you have been seen being very harsh with yourself, you have modeled the behavior. And so if you're seeing your child being very harsh with themselves and you're wondering, well, I've never really been hard on him or her. Why do they seem so terrified of making a mistake? Well, they've seen you get really worked up when you make a mistake. And I am saying this with very, very deep compassion because it hits a nerve for me as well. Because a lot of times I see that my own child has a very hard time accepting failure. And while in certain ages developmentally, this may to a degree be natural, it seems that he has a difficulty in this matter from very young. And I know that I haven't been harsh with him. But I know that it's taken me a long while to start to untangle the way that I react to my own mistakes. It's taken me a long time to reach a level where I can potentially call myself a recovering perfectionist. To this day, I don't know that my default is not perfectionism. And so I understand that inadvertently, I have probably modeled certain ways of reacting to failure. Not when I was conscious of it. So when losing a game while playing with him, I have been very nonchalant about it. I have voiced how okay it is to lose. But what about those moments when I thought he wasn't watching or he wasn't listening? What about those times that it was something that was completely irrelevant to him and I was discussing it with my husband of how I felt about myself? While I am very careful that these conversations don't happen in front of him, it's very hard that they never do. It's practically impossible with the way that our schedules are set. So I'm willing to bet that he may have caught ear of certain things. He may have seen my frustration with myself, just my facial expressions when I make a mistake. And so this is not to blame myself or for you to blame yourself if you find that you're in a similar situation. This is not an invitation for you, yet again, to be harsh with yourself because of what you may have modeled. If that is what you're doing, then it's very counter to what we're trying to do right here, right now. My invitation is that you start to take away that belief that it's egotistical to work on yourself, that it's egotistical to spend time resolving these issues, or to spend money by going to a therapist to get help and support in untangling all of this. Because quite frankly, while I do believe that there are things that we can resolve on our own, by listening to these podcasts and reading self-help books and doing our own journaling, that's definitely one way. There are a lot of benefits to having support in doing all of this. Because while we are in it, we cannot see things the way that a third person with experience and knowledge and training can help us do it. And you may know this, psychologists are constantly in therapy themselves. And when they're not in therapy, they're in supervision for this exact reason, because we need someone else to reflect back to us the things that we need to resolve because we're too close. A lot of times I have all the knowledge and the theory. I have worked with people who are facing something very similar, and I've helped them with my approach and the things that I've said to them. And then I find that I'm facing a very similar, if not the same issue. And I know all the things and I know all the background and I understand why it's happening and where it's coming from. And I know what to tell myself. And yet I need someone to be there so that I can process the emotional aspect of it all. Because the theoretical aspect is not enough. A lot of times we find that we've got it down. We are very well aware of where something began, why it has progressed and why it's in the state that it is now, and how we can mentally change our mindset. But then it keeps on repeating nonetheless, even though we've changed the way that we think about the issue. And my experience has taught me that what's happening there is that there is that somatic and that emotional experience that hasn't been resolved. That though cognitively our mind is in a different place, that's not enough to just magically resolve the pent-up energy in our body, the pent-up emotion that needs to be also released so that the mind will follow. And now that we've explored why self-compassion is so vital in the way that we parent our children, let's get into the practical side of things. How do we do this? Give me the steps, Markella. Because it's one thing to understand the concept, like I just said, and it's another thing to put it into practice. So here are 6 steps that you can take today in order to get closer to gentle parenting yourself. One is to recognize your inner critic. Bring him or her to the surface. Acknowledge their existence. And here's how to do that. Start to notice that inner voice that criticizes you. Most of us are so used to it that we don't even realize it. And if you're having a difficult time with this, here is what you can look out for. Ask yourself, what do I tell myself when I make a mistake? How do I tend to react to my own struggles? Do I offer myself support? And that could be with a pat on the back or a self-care routine that I do by myself, or by seeking support somewhere else, in a group setting, in a therapeutic setting, by speaking to a friend, by hugging my partner. Or do I pile on judgment? You should have gotten over this already. Oh my God, this is not that hard, right? And so then you can consider this. If these are not things that I would say or do to my child or a friend or my partner, then why is it that I keep on doing them to myself? On a more practical level, because this is all mental, you can use your journal. Write down the thoughts that you notice creeping in when you are stressed or become self-critical. Starting to become aware of that voice inside your head and starting to treat it as an inner critic, meaning as a different part of you, as one of your parts, not as your full identity, your full self, is the first step. Then, step 2 is to pause and reframe. So once you've started to notice your inner critic, the next step would be using the power of pausing. When you catch yourself spiraling into self-criticism, stop and take a deep breath. Ask yourself, is this what I would do, or is this what I would say if my child were dealing with something similar? And then, because the answer is probably going to be no, some reframing examples could be, instead of saying, I am so bad at this, try to respond with, I'm still learning, and that's okay. Or instead of saying, I should have handled that better, you could say, I'll approach it differently next time. Reframing doesn't mean sugarcoating your mistakes. So let's get that idea out of our minds, because it doesn't mean that you will give yourself the permission slip to do it again. It's about giving yourself that same understanding for the mistake that you would give to someone you love, despite the fact that you may recognize and you may voice that this isn't the best way to approach a situation. That's it. You're not telling yourself, go ahead, do it again, just because you are kind. If your child hit you, you will not tell them that hitting is okay. You will tell them that you recognize that they had a very tough day at school and that they're very upset because they argued with their friend or because you didn't buy them the toy that they wanted, and that you understand why they are so angry and frustrated. And you will note that it came out in the particular way in hitting you. But then you will also tell them that there are alternative ways to handle the situation better. So basically, you will support them in building the skills so that they can handle it better next time, so that they can understand what the emotion is, frustration, anger, resentment, and then they can learn to become aware of the emotion, and they can have other options that they can, in time, choose from, instead of the option that they chose, which was hitting. Do you see? This was very kind. This was very compassionate, yet it wasn't permissive. And that's exactly the way that I am inviting you to treat yourself. And so step 3 is to give yourself permission to choose. Gentle parenting is about giving kids choices. And the same applies for us. The same applies for you. When you're feeling overwhelmed, for example, you can ask yourself, what do I need in the moment? What do I need now? Is the task that I am forcing myself to get on with really urgent? Or can it wait a little so that I can take care of the need that's coming up and it's causing this overwhelm? As a practical step, and I really like this one, I would suggest creating a small permission list for yourself. For example, I give myself permission to take a break when I need it. I give myself permission to say no without feeling guilty. I give myself permission to do things imperfectly. These small affirmations can help you shift your mindset from one of pressure to one of choice, to feeling freedom. Step 4 is to practice self-compassion daily. Like with any practice, like with any habit that we're trying to break, this needs to start to become embedded, ingrained within us. And the only way for that to happen is that we stay committed. It's not about getting it perfect, but it is about showing up for ourselves consistently. Simple practices that can help us keep up with this in the day-to-day could be, well, an affirmation. Maybe you can start your morning by saying, I'm doing my best, and that's enough. Just say that to yourself, looking at yourself in the mirror, right at the beginning of your day. And then you can pair this by ending your day, considering and noting down one thing that you did well. Even if it's small, celebrate it. That's what I mean when I'm talking about consistency. Not something grand or big, but something that will help you rewire your brain from its tendency to look at mistakes, problems, and imperfections to one where it starts to focus on the things that have gone well. And again, if you're struggling to do this, imagine how you would do it with your child. That will help shift your mood and your mindset in that moment so that then you can replicate it immediately with yourself. If your child told you there was nothing good that I did today, you wouldn't take that for an answer. You would help them look actively. Do that for yourself as well, even if it's something really small, okay? Step 5 is to lean on a support system. You are not meant to do this alone. You will not be convinced that you deserve to be treated gently if you do this alone. Just as we teach our kids to ask for help when they need it, and that this is a form of being strong, we need to do the same for ourselves. So this looks like asking your partner to support you in this endeavor, letting them know what it is that you're trying out. Let them know how you're feeling and ask them for specific assistance that you might need, like taking over bedtime or supporting you with some of the chores so that you can spend some time for yourself exploring all of these things that we've discussed today. Journaling, talking with a friend, going to a session, whatever. You can also reach out to a trusted friend or a family member that you feel comfortable with and share your struggles. That in itself can be quite a relief. If you're up for it, of course, support can come in the form of therapy, because there you can really bring out the inner critic in a safe, contained space where you can start to work on understanding its roots and then understanding what your inner critic needs in order to feel reassured that they don't need to be taking over the command center. Because like I've said before, all of our parts are there for a reason. And if you have a really loud inner critic, he or she is there because they think that they're helping you in this way. Again, because it's become a coping mechanism and you've learned that being critical with yourself will save you from being banished, unloved, rejected. And so your inner critic needs to be appeased, that they no longer need to be as alert or vigilant or scared for you so that they can tone down their efforts. Finally, step 6, celebrate growth, not perfection. Growth is progress, not when we've perfected something, but when we're growing. You don't have to get it right all the time. What matters is that you're trying and that you're showing up for yourself and creating a new way of being. So in that light, the goal isn't to eliminate your inner critic completely. That's never going to happen. The inner critic is part of us. But what we want to do is to relieve them of that stress, to relieve them of that harsh job for them as well, to be whipping us into submission, and to amplify a kinder, more gentle voice that balances out the inner critic, that proves to the inner critic that there is another way. over time, even these small moments of self-compassion will start to add up, and you will notice that the way you treat yourself has indeed changed, that your default mode in how you treat others as well has changed. And I know that I tend to give simple steps, or what seem to be simple steps, and there is a reason for that. If I overwhelm you with really difficult steps, you're never going to try them out. You're never going to feel like you can start working on this on your own. And quite frankly, the really complicated steps are not the answer. What really matters is that you do this with intention. And if it helps, see this like a project. See yourself as a project. See reparenting yourself as a task that you have to do and you have to complete. Not to perfection, but with consistent effort. And maybe that will motivate you to stay on track and keep showing up for yourself in that way. That is something that I am adopting starting this year. And while putting this as my priority has kind of thrown off the balance of other things, and I'm here recording this episode quite last minute and feeling like adding the video version was probably a mistake because I didn't get to pre-record and batch content and do all the things that I wanted to do, I am noticing what I have done is that I did put self-care in the form that I need it as top priority, that I am very much forgiving with myself for not sticking to particular schedules that I initially set, and that I'm okay with it, at least for now. Because while some things are lagging behind, there are other things that I value more that are starting to slowly flourish. And so it's really important that you make sure, despite the discomfort that you may feel when you begin this process, despite the growth that may seem slow, that you stick with it. Because while some areas may struggle, others will blossom, and that will be your reward. And there will be balance eventually. But just like when we're trying to learn something new, we have to give it a little bit more attention, and some things may suffer just a little bit, but then we start to become more adept. And so then again, we don't need as heavy of a focus because we don't need to be as conscious, and balance follows in that same way. This will also fall into place. So as we wrap up today's episode, I hope this has been very helpful. And my wish is that if I leave you with one thing, it's this, that compassion isn't just about being kind. It's about growing and creating the space for reconnecting with yourself, with your partner, and with your children, parenting them in the way that you have envisioned, in a way that makes you feel proud, in a way that paves a better future for them. The way you treat yourself sets the tone. It sets the tone for how you show up with your kids. It sets the tone of how they understand how to treat themselves. It sets the tone for how you feel throughout the day and throughout your parenting journey. So, here's my challenge for you this week. Pick one moment each day where you practice self-compassion. Maybe it's catching one self-critical thought and replacing it with kindness. Maybe it's giving yourself permission to say no. Or maybe it's in that moment where you take a deep breath and you tell yourself you're doing your best and that is more than enough. If today's episode resonated with you, I would love to hear about it. Tell me, what is one way that you are choosing to gentle parent yourself this week? Send me a message on Instagram at markella.kaplani or email me at info@markellakaplani.com. Share your thoughts and your path and your hopes and your dreams. I would love to cheer you on. Thank you for spending time with me on the Parenthood and Relationship podcast. I'll leave you with this. You don't have to be perfect to be a great parent. You're already doing an amazing job. Take care of yourself. Be gentle. And I'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.